Today we're going to be looking at adaptations of the body systems with training. Giannis Antetokounmpo is an NBA player who will train every day to be as good as he can be. He uses the aerobic system throughout each game, jogging up and down the court when he needs to. He also uses the anaerobic system when sprinting up the court on a fast break. And finally, he uses the ATP/PC system when jumping up to do the tip at the beginning of the game. The aerobic system requires a low intensity for as much time that the exercise lasts, whereas the anaerobic system requires high intensity exercise for up to 2 minutes. Training methods that could be used for aerobic training are continuous training, but anaerobic training could consist of power, strength, speed, or speed training. The FIT principle for training is how you can change training to help yourself keep improving. The F is frequency and will be increased in aerobic or anaerobic training to increase capacity. The I is intensity, so for aerobic training it would be moderate, whereas anaerobic would be maximal intensity. Thirdly, the first T is time, so aerobic would be high duration and would be increased during training, but anaerobic would be a much shorter duration, but it would also be increased as training progresses. The second T is for type, meaning that training will be specific for anaerobic or aerobic for a certain sport. For example, Giannis may want to do some continuous aerobic training, as in basketball you rarely stop running. Firstly, we're going to be looking at adaptations to the aerobic training. Adaptations for the cardiovascular system would be cardiac hypertrophy, which would increase stroke volume, causing heart rate to decrease. This could lead to athlete's heart, which is where the heart is larger and resting heart rate is lower than normal. For example, in the stroke volume graph, you can see that it is larger after training, which is the opposite to the heart rate, but the same as VO2 max. Also, capillarization is increased, meaning that more oxygen can be delivered and more waste products can be removed. Also, the number of red blood cells is increased, therefore so is hemoglobin, and therefore more oxygen can be delivered around the body. The viscosity of the blood increases, meaning that it is thicker than before. Finally, training reduces the chance of cardiovascular diseases like coronary heart disease. There are also many changes in the respiratory system, as ventilation will decrease at submax exercise, but increase at maximal exercise due to increase in the tidal volume, meaning that there is a larger VO2 max. Also, due to the increase in tidal volume, breathing rate decreases with aerobic training. Endurance of respiratory muscles are improved and strength is improved slightly. Therefore, the muscles will not fatigue as easily. Due to an increased ability for the lungs to expand, there is a higher tidal volume and a higher ventilation. Another adaptation is that the number of alveoli increase, allowing more diffusion pathways, and there are more capillaries in the lungs, so there is a quicker exchange rate, and so the absorbance of oxygen and removal of carbon dioxide is increased. Finally, the epoch size will decrease, and so Giannis will recover quicker, and so will be able to play at his best in the next game. The neuromuscular system adapts by having an increased recruitment of slow oxidative fibers, and slow oxidative fibers will have an increased endurance, so you can work out for longer. Also, there is an increase in mitochondria, so more ATP can be synthesized, so there is a higher energy production. Another adaptation would be increased myoglobin, so more oxygen can be held in the muscles ready for respiration. Adaptations of the energy system include increased enzyme activity, so reactions can happen faster and more happen, so you can make more muscle contractions. Also, there is a lower respiratory exchange rate and an increased dependency on fat, so more free fatty acids are used, and therefore there is an enhanced glycogen sparing, as you are using more fat instead of glycogen. Also, fat gives off more energy per gram, so it's more effective at producing energy. The lactate graphs show that the OVLA takes longer to reach after training, which means that the performer will fatigue slower and so can exercise for longer. Finally, aerobic training can bring some skeletal benefits like long distance running. These are increased bone density, stronger ligaments, and increased range of movement. Now we are going to be looking at adaptations to anaerobic training. Firstly, cardiovascular and respiratory adaptations. So, after anaerobic training there will be myocardium hypertrophy, which leads to an increased stroke volume and decreased heart rate. Also, the size and strength of respiratory muscles increase, meaning that more space can be made in the lungs for air. Also, there is an increased breathing rate. All of these adaptations lead to an increased recovery rate, meaning that performers can play sooner. Neuromuscular adaptations are fast glycolytic hypertrophy, which occurs by the tearing of a fibre, and satellite cells will create new muscle tissue where it has been teared. Hyperplasia occurs, which is the enlargement of the tissue caused by an increase in reproduction rate of its cells. This occurs when there is strength, power and speed training, and male's muscle mass increases quicker than female muscle mass. Also, tendon strength increases, reducing the chance of injury in the performer. Another adaptation is that proprioceptors give faster feedback, meaning that there are quicker movements, which is essential for Giannis, as it is important to be very athletic in basketball. There is also an increase in force production, as there is an increase in multi-units and faster recruitment of them, and an increased ability of summation, so much more power is generated. The energy systems adapt in many ways, and one adaptation is that there is an increase in anaerobic enzyme activity, and the enzymes have an increased tolerance of lactic acid, meaning that the enzymes can make more successful reactions, and they will not denature in the presence of lactic acid. Also, there is an increase in glycolytic enzyme activity like phosphorylase. Another adaptation would be that PC, ATP, and triglyceride stores are increased, meaning that you can use the ATP-PC system for a longer period, and you can use more fats for an energy source. This is good for a basketball player like Giannis, as he needs to make explosive movements when jumping or driving to the basket, etc. And phosphocreatine is great for this. Also, lactic acid builds up slower with training, as lactic acid buffer, which is sodium bicarbonate, is increased. This means that the OVLA is higher, meaning that you will fatigue slower, and so you will be able to perform anaerobic activities for longer. As you can see in these lactate threshold graphs, the OVLA is higher after training. Another adaptation is that your basal metabolic rate becomes faster. Finally, adaptations to the skeletal system are that bone density increases. This is due to many factors, which are osteoclast activity increases, so bone tissue is broken down, repaired, and then remodeled to increase bone density. Also, osteoblast moves to the surface of the bone and synthesize collagen to form a dense bone tissue, therefore increasing the bone density. Another adaptation is that you can get a wider range of movement, which is very useful for Giannis, as if he needs to stretch up to catch the ball, he can do this. Also, training increases strength of cartilage, therefore giving more protection to bones. However, if you train too much, you can get osteoarthritis due to cartilage being broken down, which can cause serious pain in joints. Also, ligaments are strengthened, meaning that you are less likely to get injuries, which is important for Giannis in his ankle, as here is a major injury point in basketball.